How was your day? Maybe someone looked at you and decided what you were worth before you ever had the chance to show them. There was a man in the old Highland stories who was covered head to toe in gold, not to be admired, to be given away. If today felt like that, he would understand. So let yourself grow heavy now. The lake is cold, the air is thin, the mist is rising. Let me take you up the mountain to the water where it all begins. Picture it now. A raft of pale wood slides out onto the black-green water. On it stands a man made of gold. The whole shore has gone silent. He lifts the gold above his head. He holds it, and then he lets it fall into the water. Gone on purpose. Now here's the strange part. He could have kept it, all of it. Enough gold to buy a kingdom, and instead he gave it to a lake that would never thank him. The people on the shore did not gasp. They did not weep for the loss. They bowed their heads to them. Nothing had been lost at all. Something had been kept safe. Maybe you know that quiet already. The feeling that the thing worth most is the thing you let go of gently. This whole story lives inside that feeling. This is what we do here every week, one old story, one night. Something that happened long ago and still has something to say to you now. Get comfortable now. Fix your pillow, find your warmth. If you drift off before the raft returns, the old gods won't mind. They have watched over sleeping people for a very long time. This is only the beginning of the old story, the part most people never reach. That's still ahead. But not tonight. Tonight. Just this. Just the water and the gold. If tonight felt like something, subscribe. We'll be here next week. Another story. Another night like this one. Now back to the mountain and the water. High in the mountains, above the heat and the jungle, there lived a people who called the mist their neighbor. They were the Muisca, and they were rich in a way the world would never understand. They had gold, yes, and emeralds green as wet leaves, but they did not measure their wealth in what they kept. They measured it in what they were able to give. At the heart of their world was a lake, round as a coin, still as held breath. They believed a mother lived beneath it, the one who had first risen from the water long ago. And when a new chief was chosen, they did not put a crown on him. They did something older. They made him into the sun itself for one morning only. They coated his body in gold dust until he glowed. Then they set him on a raft and sent him out to give everything he wore to the lake. That was the crowning. That was the whole of it. But this year the old chief was tired, and no man had yet been chosen. Somewhere in the village, a young man slept, not knowing the lake was already waiting for him. That is where we begin. Let me show you the people first. Not their names, their shapes. The old chief, tired now, the young man who does not know yet, and the lake that has waited longer than any of them. The old chief had led his people through more winters than he could count. His hands shook now when he held the staff. He knew the lake was asking for someone new. He was not ready to answer. Every night he climbed a little way toward the water. He would stand at the rim and listen. The lake never spoke in words, but he understood it anyway. It was patient. It was also certain. In the village below lived a young man who fixed nets and carried water. Nothing marked him out. He was quick and quiet, and he watched more than he spoke. He did not think the lake knew his name, but the lake keeps its own counsel. And there was one who read its moods, a priest named Tiskezuza, who carried a bowl of dark water and looked into it the way you might look into a stranger's face. Tiskezuza believed the water showed him things, not the future, exactly, more like weather, a pressure before a storm. Lately the bowl had gone strange on him too, still, too dark, as if it were holding its breath. He did not tell the others yet. Some things you sit with first. He only knew that a season of giving was coming, and underneath it, far off, something that wanted to take. He could not yet see its face. To understand these people, you have to understand the lake. And to understand the lake, you have to go back to before there were villages, before there was gold. To the morning the first mother rose from the water. Her name was Bachue. She came out of the water carrying a child, and the two of them peopled the whole green world. When her work was done, she walked back into the lake and did not come out again. But she did not vanish. She changed. Some say she slipped into the shape of a great serpent and coiled at the bottom of the lake, watching, keeping. That is why the water was never only water. So when the Muisca gave gold to the lake, they were not throwing it away. They were handing it to a mother, returning it to the one who had given them everything first. Do you see the difference? It changes the whole picture. The gold came from far rivers and traded hands. The emeralds came from the green cliffs to the north. None of it was easy to get. That was the point. You do not give a mother something that cost you nothing. The goldsmiths worked in small dark rooms, melting and shaping. They made tiny rafts of gold, little figures, little offerings, beautiful things made only to be given to the water and never seen again. Think about that kind of work. To spend weeks making something perfect, knowing no one will ever hang it on a wall, knowing it goes straight into the dark. Some of them wept as they worked. Not from sadness, from something bigger. The old chief remembered his own crowning long ago, the cold of the dawn, the weight of the gold plate in his young arms, the moment he let it fall. He had never felt richer than in the instant it left his hands. Now his arms could barely lift a cup. He knew he could not stand on the raft again. The lake would need a younger back to carry the gold, and a younger heart brave enough to let it go. Here's the part the old stories never quite make obvious. Choosing the golden man was not a reward. It was a burden set on a single pair of shoulders, and the whole village leaned on whoever carried it. The chosen one would fast, would go without light, would stay in a small dark room while the gold dust was prepared, and then coated and shining would carry the whole people's hope out onto the deepest water. So the elders talked, for nights. They named this young man and that one, strong ones, clever ones, well-born ones, and each time the old chief shook his head. He did not know what he was waiting to hear, only that he had not heard it yet. Meanwhile, the young netmender went on with his small days. He carried water up the terraces. He shared his fish with an old widow 2 houses down. He did not know his name had begun to travel through the dark council room. It was Tiskisusa who first spoke his name. Not because of his strength, because of something he had seen the young man do at the shore when he thought no one was watching. The young man had found a gold trinket washed up in the reeds, a real one, enough to make him rich, and Tiskisusa had watched him turn it over once, look at the lake, and set it back into the water without a word. He already knows how to give it back, Tiskisusa said, before anyone asked him to. The old chief looked up. For the first time in many nights, something in his chest went quiet and sure. He had heard it now. But knowing is one thing, telling him is another. How do you walk up to a young man mending nets and say, "The lake has asked for you," and you cannot say no? They decided to wait until morning. That same night, Tiskisusa went back to his bowl. He wanted to see the young man's fate in the dark water. What he saw instead made him set the bowl down very slowly and sit for a long time without moving. In the water he saw ships, not rafts, ships with cloth wings far away on a sea he had never seen, and men the color of old bone with hard gray shells on their chests, all of them looking toward the mountains, looking for gold. He did not understand it, not yet. The ships were far years away, maybe lifetimes, but the water does not show you things for no reason. He knew the giving and the taking were somehow bound together. He just could not see how. Stay with that image for a moment before we move on. A quiet priest, alone in the dark, holding a bowl of water that has just shown him the far edge of the world. He tells no one, not tonight. Some weights you carry alone first. Morning came the way it always does. Cook smoke rose, children ran down the terraces, and a small group of elders walked slowly toward a certain thatched house in their finest mantles, moving the way people move when they carry news that changes a life. The young man saw them coming and stood up from his nets. His first thought was that he had done something wrong. He looked from face to face, and then he saw the old chief's eyes and understood it was something else entirely. The old chief did not make a speech. He simply said, "The lake has chosen, and I think it chose well." The young man opened his mouth to refuse. Nothing came out. Some doors, once open, do not close again. And so a net mender became the man the whole story would remember. Not a king, not a warrior. Someone who already knew how to open his hand. Remember that about him. It matters more than the gold ever will. That night the young man could not sleep. He walked up the cloud forest path in the dark, alone, until he stood at the rim of the lake. He wanted to ask it something. He did not know what. The water gave him no answer he could hear, but standing there, with the cold rising off the surface and the mist on his face, his fear grew quiet. Not gone, just quiet. The way fear does when you stop running from it. Maybe you have stood somewhere like that, at the edge of a thing you did not choose and could not undo, and found that the edge itself was calmer than all the running that led you there. The old stories knew that feeling well. When he came down at dawn, something in him had settled. He did not tell anyone about the night, but the old chief looked at his face and knew. "You went up," he said. The young man nodded. "Good," said the chief. "The lake likes to meet you first." Now the preparing began. It would take many days. The gold had to be gathered, the emeralds counted, the dust ground fine as flour, and the young man had to be made ready inside, which was the slowest work of all. The old chief became his teacher, not in words mostly. They walked the terraces together. They sat by the water. The old man showed him how to hold the offering plate so his arms would not shake at the moment that mattered. "The gold is heavy," the old chief said, "but that is not the weight that gets you. The weight is knowing you will give it. Carry that first. The gold is easy after that." The young man did not understand yet. He would. Tisksoosa watched them from a distance and said nothing about the ships. He told himself the vision was far off, that this year belonged to the giving. But at night the bowl still went dark, and the far sails still crept a little closer. "But that is a shadow for later. Set it down for now," the way he tried to. "Tonight there is only the mountain, the water, and a young man learning how to give. Let the rest wait. It will keep." Let me pause here, gently, and tell you something the Muisca understood that the wider world never has. They did not give gold to the lake to please a god. They gave it because keeping too much felt like a kind of sickness. To them, a thing hoarded went stale. It stopped moving, and things that stop moving begin to rot, even gold, even in the heart. Giving kept the world flowing. The lake was where they poured what would otherwise have stagnated. Other peoples heard about the gold in the lake and thought only one thing: get it out. But the Muisca were not hiding treasure. They were practicing letting go, over and over, until it stopped hurting. That is a very different kind of wealth. Their neighbors traded with them for salt and cloth and knew them as fair. No one cheated on a Muisca deal, they said, because the Muisca did not seem to want the way other men wanted. It is hard to trick someone who is already content. Keep that thought close as the story goes on. The giving was not a ritual they performed. It was who they were. And the men who would one day come for the gold could never understand it, which is exactly why they never found it. Back to the young man, then. Day by day, the old chief peeled the fear off him. They practiced the walk to the raft, the lift of the plate, the breath before the release, until the young man could do it in his sleep, almost. There was one thing left to gather, the greatest emerald, kept for the crowning of a chief, a stone the size of a fist, green as the deep forest, held in the temple and given to the lake only at moments like this. When the young man first saw it, he understood how much was being asked. This one stone could feed the village through 10 hungry winters, and it too would go into the water without a second thought. He held it, and his hands did not shake. That surprised him. "You see?" said the old chief softly. "You are already becoming him, the one who can hold the greatest thing and not close your fingers around it." The young man looked at the stone a long time. Then he set it gently back in its niche to wait. The days grew shorter. The rite would be held at the next full moon, at the dawn after. The whole village began to hum with quiet preparation. Nets were set aside. Fields were tended early. Everyone would be at the shore. The young man's mother came to him the night before the fasting began. She did not tell him to be brave. She only held his face in her hands and said, "I gave you to the world once already. This is only the second time." Then she smiled and let him go. Maybe you know that too. The people who love you best are often the ones who have practiced letting you go the longest. She had been giving him to the world since the day he was born. She simply had a word for it now. Then the fasting began. 3 days in the small dark room with only water. No light, no food, just the young man and his own thoughts, learning to be empty enough to carry something sacred. The village kept its distance and waited. In the dark, strange things moved through the mind. He thought of the trinket he had returned to the reeds. He thought of the old chief's shaking hands. He thought once of pale ships he had never seen, though he did not know why. The thought passed like cold water. Tiskasusa, outside the chamber, felt the same cold pass through him at the same moment. He pressed his hand to the wooden door. "Not yet," he whispered to whatever was coming. "Give him this one morning. Then do what you must." The dark did not answer. On the third night, the moon rose full over the mountains, and its light lay on the lake like a road of silver. The old chief stood at the rim and watched it. "Tomorrow," he said to the water, "I am giving you a good one." The lake held still. Somewhere far below the surface, if the old stories are true, something ancient stirred and turned in its sleep. Bashoe, the mother, the coiled keeper. She had welcomed many golden men into her water. She was ready for one more. Before dawn, they opened the chamber. The young man came out blinking, thinner, quieter, his eyes very clear. 3 days of dark had washed something off him. He looked, the old chief thought, already a little like the sun before it rises. They led him to the mats. They gave him a little water and a little maize, and then they began the slowest part of all, the covering, the turning of a man into gold, one soft breath of dust at a time. First they rubbed his skin with a sticky sap so the gold would hold. Then through hollow reeds they blew the powder over him, slowly, everywhere, his arms, his back, his face. The dark room began to glow. He kept his eyes closed and breathed slow, the way the old chief had taught him. He felt the gold settle like warm snow. He felt himself disappearing and something else taking his place. He was becoming a gift. It did not frighten him anymore. When it was done, they held up a polished stone of black obsidian so he could see himself. A being of gold looked back. He did not recognize the face, and yet it was more him than he had ever been. Both were true at once. They dressed him then in his ornaments, the crescent at the nose, the wide disc on the chest, the emerald beads at the throat, each one placed with a small murmured word. He stood, and the whole small room seemed too poor to hold him. Outside, the sky was going pale gray at its eastern edge. The village had gathered along the shore in the dark, hundreds of them, torches in hand, saying nothing, waiting for their gold to walk out of the temple and into the water. The great emerald was carried out first, on a woven cushion. Then the baskets of gold offerings. Then the little golden rafts the smiths had wept over. All of it piled onto the low balsa raft at the water's edge, waiting for the one who would take it out. And then the temple door opened and he stepped out, the golden man. In the torchlight, his whole body caught fire without burning. The crowd drew one breath together. Some fell to their knees. He walked toward the water, and the sea of people parted. The old chief stood at the raft. As the golden man reached him, the two looked at each other for a long moment. No words, just a passing on from tired hands to strong ones. Then the old chief stepped back and let the young man board alone. 4 rowers took their places at the raft's corners. The golden man stood at its center, among the gold, waiting. Someone pushed the raft free of the gravel, and slowly, silently, it slid out onto the black water, toward the middle of the world. The higher the raft climbed toward the lake's center, the paler the sky grew. The rowers timed it perfectly, by long habit, by prayer. They wanted the young man to make his offering at the exact moment the sun broke the eastern ridge. On the shore, no one moved. The torches guttered low. Tiskasusa stood among them with his empty bowl, watching half in prayer and half in dread. This was the moment he had asked the darkness to spare. He held his breath with everyone else. The raft reached the center. The rowers lifted their oars and went still. The golden man stood alone above the deepest water, gold from head to foot, the whole village's giving piled at his feet. He waited for the sun, and the sun came. The instant the light touched him, he blazed. From the shore he looked less like a man than like a second sun, risen on the water. The whole crowd made a sound low in their chests, not quite a word, and the young man lifted the first offering high. He gave the small gold rafts first, one by one, tipping them into the water. Then the baskets of trinkets. Each one caught the light and vanished. He did not rush. Each thing deserved its own moment of leaving. The lake took them all without a ripple of complaint. At last only the great emerald remained. He lifted it in both hands. The green of it drank the dawn and threw it back deeper. For one heartbeat he held the richest thing his people owned above the deepest water they knew. And then he opened his hands. The emerald struck the surface and was gone. Green light, then nothing, then the smooth water closing over it like a door. On the shore, a long breath went out of 1,000 chests at once. It was done. It was given. The lake had its gift. But the gold on his own body was not yet given. That was the last offering, and the strangest, to wash himself clean in the sacred water, and hand even his own shining skin to the lake. That is where we will go next. For now, let it hang in the light. The golden man stood on the empty raft, and the sun climbed higher. His whole body still glowed. But the last gift was the hardest one, not the gold he carried, but the gold he had become. He remembered the old chief's words. "The weight is knowing you will give it." He breathed. He stepped to the raft's edge, and then, without a splash, he slipped down into the cold green water of the lake. The cold took his breath. The gold began to lift from his skin in pale clouds, curling away into the green, sinking slowly toward the mother below. Piece by piece he handed himself over. Piece by piece he became only a man again. On the shore they watched the gold leave the water's surface in a widening bloom, like a second dawn spilled on the lake. And they watched the man rise up from it, plain and brown and shivering. Their chief, newly poor, newly real. This is the part the wider world would never understand. They thought the treasure was the gold in the water. But the people on that shore knew better. The treasure was the man who had learned to give it. He was worth more empty than full. They rowed him back slowly. No one cheered. Cheering was not the shape of this joy. Instead, a low hum rose from the crowd. A wordless note passed mouth to mouth, until the whole shore was singing one soft sound to the water. When the raft touched the gravel, the old chief was the first to reach him. He wrapped a warm mantle around the shivering young man's shoulders and held him a moment. "Now you are theirs," he whispered, "and they are yours." The young man could only nod. They walked him up from the water through a crowd that reached out to touch his wet arms as he passed. Not to worship, to thank. He had carried their giving to the deepest place and brought their emptiness back like a blessing. Only Tiskasusa hung back. He was glad, truly glad. The morning had been given unspoiled, but over the far mountains the sky had a strange metal color he did not like. He touched his empty bowl and said nothing. The vision had not gone away. It had only waited. But that morning belonged to joy, and joy should not be interrupted. There was a feast that day such as the young chief had never seen. Maize and fish and honeyed fruit, music, dancing on the terraces, the whole village breathing out at once. The young chief sat at the center of it, still a little dazed. People he had known all his life bowed to him now, and it made him want to laugh and weep at once. Yesterday, he mended nets. Today he was the father of a people. The old chief watched from the edge, and for the first time in years his hands did not shake. He had carried the right as far as he could. Now it belonged to a younger man. He felt the weight lift, and under it, something like grief. Both were true. That night the young chief climbed the path to the lake one more time, alone as he had before the rite. He wanted to thank the water. He stood at the rim and looked down at the black circle that held everything his people had ever given. "I don't know how to be what they need," he said aloud, to the water. The lake did not answer in words, but a small wind moved across it, and the mist parted, and for a moment the moon lay whole and bright on the surface. He took it as a yes. In the weeks that followed, he learned the work of leading, settling disputes over field boundaries, deciding when to plant and when to hold. Sitting with the sick, it was less grand than the raft and the gold. It was also, he found, the real crowning. Here is the part the myths never make obvious. The rite was one morning. The giving it stood for was every single day after. He learned to open his hand 100 small times, with his time, his patience, his sleep. The gold had only been practice. The old chief did not live to see the next full moon. He died quietly in his sleep, his staff beside him, a small smile on his face. They said the lake had called him home at last. The young chief carried his body up the mountain himself. They gave the old man to the water too. In his way, his ashes scattered on the surface at dawn to sink and settle among the gold he had once carried out. The young chief stood at the rim and understood, finally, that giving and dying were cousins. Both were a letting go. The seasons turned. The young chief grew into an old one, though that is a long story for another night. What matters now is that under all the ordinary years, the far ships in Tiskasusa's bowl kept sailing, slowly, always toward the mountains. But the ships are still far. Let them stay far a while longer. There is time yet in the highlands, time for maize to grow and children to be born and the lake to gather more gifts. Stay in that time with me. It is a good place to rest. Word of the Muisca and their golden right traveled, the way all good stories do. Traders carried it down the mountains, down to the hot lowlands, along the rivers, from mouth to mouth, growing a little each time it was told. A man covered in gold, they said, who gives it to a lake, and by the third telling, the man was a king. By the 10th, the lake was lined with gold. By the 100th, there was a whole city of gold hidden in the mountains. That is how legends are made. The Muisca themselves would have laughed at the golden city. There was no city. There was only a lake and a right and a truth about letting go that could not be carried in a saddlebag. But the story that traveled kept the gold and dropped the truth. Stories often do. For now, though, the story was only a story told for wonder, harming no one. The gold slept safe in the lake. The Muisca lived there quiet, giving lives, and far across an ocean no one in the highlands had ever imagined. Other men began to dream of the same gold. But we are getting ahead. Come back up the mountain with me, to the years of peace, before the taking began. Let us stay in the giving world a while longer. There is more to see here, and it is gentle, and you are safe. In those peaceful years, the young chief married a woman from a neighboring village. She was a weaver, with clever hands and a way of going quiet that made everyone around her go quiet too. He had loved her since before he was chosen. He had never dared to say. Being chosen, it turned out, had made him braver in small things. He went to her at last. He did not make a grand speech. He only handed her a fish he had caught, the way he had once handed one to an old widow, and asked if she would sit with him a while. She sat with him, and then she kept sitting with him. Season after season, they had children, 3 of them who ran the same terraces their father had once carried water up. He watched them and remembered the boy he had been. It seemed 100 years ago. It seemed like yesterday. Maybe you know how that feels. To look at the life you built and not quite believe it grew from the frightened person you once were. He did not feel worthy of it. He felt grateful for it. In the end, those are not so different. Tiskasusa grew old alongside him. The two became close friends, the chief and the priest. On quiet evenings, they would sit at the lake and say little. The priest never spoke of the ships. He told himself they would not come in their lifetime. In this, at least, he was right. But once near the end, the priest broke his silence. There is something coming, he told the chief softly. Not for us, for our children's children, men who take instead of give. The chief was quiet a long time. Then he said, "Then we must teach the giving well, so it survives them." So that is what he did with his last years. He did not build walls or forge weapons against the coming men. He did something harder. He made sure every child in the village understood, deep in their bones, that gold was forgiving, that a hoard was a wound, that the lake was a mother, not a bank. He knew he could not stop the takers. No one could. But he could make sure that when they came, and dug, and drained, and searched, they would find only gold. Never the thing the gold had meant, that, he decided, would be his people's true defense, and he was right. The children grew. They had children. The rite was performed again, and again, each new chief carried to the deepest water and made poor and made real. The gold in the lake grew, and so did something you cannot weigh. The habit of an open hand, passed down like an heirloom. Our young chief was very old now. His hands shook the way the old chiefs once had. He knew the lake would call him soon. He was not afraid. He had spent his whole life practicing how to let go of things. This last thing he thought would be the easiest of all. He called his eldest child to him, a daughter clever like her mother, kind like him. He did not tell her to be a chief. That was not how it worked. He only told her the story of the trinket in the reeds, how he had held real gold and given it back before anyone asked. That was the whole of it, he told her. Everything I became started there, not with the gold on my skin, with the gold I put back. She held his hand. She understood. The open hand had reached her too. It would go on reaching long after him. He died as the old chief had, quietly, his staff beside him, at dawn. They carried him up the mountain. They gave his ashes to the lake, and the whole village hummed that low, wordless note again. The one that meant a gift had reached the deepest water and been received. His daughter stood at the rim and watched the ashes sink. She did not weep loudly. She had been raised to know that letting go was not the same as losing. Somewhere below, among the gold of centuries, her father was home. She turned and went back down to lead. And so the giving went on, chief after chief, gift after gift, year after quiet year. The lake grew heavy with gold and heavier with meaning, and the world beyond the mountains grew hungry and began at last to move. But before the hunger arrives, let me hold you here a moment longer in the world that was. Because to understand what was almost lost, you have to love it first. And it was so easy to love, a people whose greatest skill was letting go. They had no locks on their houses. What was there to steal when everyone already had enough, and the surplus went to the water? A traveler could sleep in any doorway and wake to a bowl of maize. Kindness was not a virtue there. It was simply the weather. They marked time by the lake and the moon, not by wealth. A rich year was one with rain and healthy children. Gold was not for having. It passed through their hands on its way to the water, the way rain passes through the sky on its way to the sea. The children were taught to give a first bite of any food to the earth or the water before they ate. A small thing, a habit. But habits are how a truth survives when the people who first spoke it are gone. The open hand was trained young. This is the thing the takers could never carry away, no matter how deep they dug. You cannot drain a habit. You cannot melt down a way of seeing. The gold at the bottom of the lake was only the shadow of the real treasure, and the real treasure lived in the people. The daughter led well and had a daughter of her own, and the story went on. Generations passed. The rite was performed so many times the lakebed glittered, they said, like a night sky turned upside down beneath the water. No one ever went down to check. That would have missed the point entirely. Think of that for a moment before you drift. A treasure so vast it would make any king weep, and no one who owned it ever tried to take it back. They knew where it was, they simply agreed, all of them, forever, to leave it given. That kind of agreement is rarer than any gold. It is the real wonder of this story, and the world outside the mountains has never once believed it. They keep looking for the city, they cannot see the lake. Stay with the lake, it is where the truth actually lives. Now let me tell you a little about the green stones. The emeralds, because they carried their own meaning, and the Muisca chose them for the lake as carefully as they chose the chief. It is worth understanding before we go on. To the Muisca, green was the color of the living world, maize, forest, rain-fed hills. And the emerald was that living green made solid, a drop of the world's own life, hardened into stone. To give an emerald was to give a piece of life itself. They believed emeralds grew in the rock the way seeds grow in soil, slowly in the dark, fed by the mountain. Mining them was a kind of harvest, and like any harvest, the first and best of it was owed back to the source, back to the water. So the greatest emeralds never became jewelry. They were not worn or sold or hoarded in a chest. They were carried up the mountain and given to the lake. The finest fruit of the earth returned to the mother of the water. The best of everything went into the dark, and the people called that wealth. When foreign men later heard that the Muisca threw emeralds into a lake, they thought it madness. Wealth drowned. But the Muisca were not drowning wealth. They were completing a circle, earth to hand to water to earth again. The madness, they might have said, was keeping, not giving. Hold that idea gently as we go on. Two ways of seeing the same green stone. One says, mine, keep guard. The other says, given, returned, complete. The whole rest of this story is the collision of those two ways. And the lake in the end keeps the second one safe. Generations more went by. Then, in the time of a chief whose name the story does keep, the far ships of Tiscasus's old vision finally touched the far coast. The men in gray shells came ashore, and they had heard the word that would ruin them. El Dorado, the golden man. They did not know it was a man. They thought it was a place. A city of gold, roofed in gold, paved in gold, waiting in the mountains for whoever was bold enough to take it. They had crossed an ocean for it. They were not going to be told it did not exist. So they began to march inland, up from the hot coast, into the green, toward the mountains where the mist lived. They asked every people they met, "Where is the golden city?" And the answer was always the same, and always a lie of hope. Farther, higher, just beyond the next ridge. The peoples they asked were not always lying to be cruel. Sometimes they simply sent the hungry men onward to be rid of them. Sometimes they truly did not know, And sometimes, this is the sad part, they pointed toward the mountains because they wanted the takers to trouble someone else. Fear does that. The march was brutal. The green that looked so gentle from below was merciless up close. Fever took some, the rivers took others. Their heavy gray shells, so proud on the coast, became cages of rust and heat. And still they climbed, dreaming of gold toward a city that was only ever a lake. This is the strange justice of the story. The very hunger that drove them was the thing that destroyed them. They could not stop wanting long enough to survive. A Muisca would have turned back at the first fever, and lived. The takers could not turn back. Their open hands had long since closed into fists. Word of the strangers climbed the mountains faster than they did. It reached the highlands. It reached the chief of that time, and the priest of that time, who kept a clay bowl the way Tiskisusa once had. The old warning had come true at last, generations late, and the people were, as promised, ready. Ready, but not with weapons. That was never the plan. The old chief long ago had understood you cannot outfight a hunger like that. You can only make sure it finds nothing it can truly use. The Muisca prepared to give the takers exactly what they asked for, and nothing that mattered. They knew the strangers wanted a city of gold, so they let the story stay a city. They did not correct it. They did not say it is only a lake, and a right, and an open hand. Let them look for a city, the elders agreed. They will look forever, and never understand what they are standing beside. It was a strange kind of protection. Not a wall, but a story, not a lie. Exactly, the gold really was there, but a truth wrapped so the takers could never open it. They would find the treasure and still miss everything. The Muisca hid the meaning inside the myth. Clever and very brave. But bravery has a cost, and the story does not pretend otherwise. The takers, when they came, were not gentle. Let me tell that part softly, the way an old storyteller must, clear enough that you understand, quiet enough that you can still rest. Because you should still rest. This was long ago. When the strangers reached the highlands, they found villages and terraces, and quiet people who did not fight them the way they expected. They found gold ornaments and took them. They found emeralds and took those too. But they did not find a city, and it drove them half mad. Where is the rest, they demanded. Where is the golden city? And the Muisca, calm even in fear, would point up toward the mountains, toward the mist, toward a lake they did not name. Farther, higher, just beyond, the strangers, hungry, believed it every time. Eventually, of course, they found the lake. It was too round, too still, too clearly sacred to stay hidden forever. The Muisca had known this day would come. When the strangers stood at last on the rim and looked down at the black water, they did not see a mother. They saw a bank vault they could not open. They asked the Muisca how much gold lay beneath the surface, and the Muisca, who had never once counted it, told them the truth. They did not know. It had never mattered enough to count. The strangers heard this as a peasant's stupidity. It was in fact the deepest wisdom in the whole valley. So the takers decided to do what takers do. If they could not scoop the gold from the water, they would remove the water from the gold. They would drain the sacred lake. They gathered laborers and buckets and began at the mother's own rim to try to empty her out. The Muisca watched them bail. They did not stop them. What was there to stop? Let them lower the water an arm's length, a body's length. Let them find a few ornaments in the shallows and think themselves rich. The lake was very deep and very patient, and it had swallowed prouder men than these. Here is the part the takers never grasped. Even if they had drained every drop, even if they had scraped the very bottom bare and carried off every last figurine, they still would not have found El Dorado, because El Dorado was never in the lake. He had walked up out of it, poor and shining, and become a man. They dug channels. They brought in more men. Over long seasons they managed to lower the water and pull some treasure from the muck, enough to keep the fever alive, never enough to end it, and the more they took, the more certain they became that the real hoard was just a little deeper. It never was. This went on for a very long time, longer than any one taker's life. They died, and others came, and took up the same buckets, chasing the same city that was always one ridge farther on. The lake outlasted them all. It is still there. It is still keeping what it was given. Some of the gold is down there yet. But we are rushing toward the end, and the end can wait. Let me slow us down. Because in the middle of all that taking, there was one taker whose story turned, a man who climbed for gold and found, at the bottom of everything, something he had not come looking for, His story is worth telling gently. He had come across the ocean young, dreaming of a golden city that would make him a lord back home. He had marched and starved and buried friends in the green. By the time he reached the lake, he was hollow and gray and older than his years, and the gold he pulled from the mud did not fill him at all. One evening, spent and sick, he sat apart from the others and watched an old Muisca woman scatter a handful of maize on the water, a first giving, the small daily habit. He did not understand it. He asked her, through a boy who spoke a little of both tongues, why she threw good food away. The old woman looked at him a long time. Then she said, through the boy, I do not throw it away, I give it back. Everything I have was given to me first. The seeker did not answer, but something in his chest, closed for years, moved a little. He did not sleep that night. He thought of everything he had done to reach that lake, the friends buried, the villages emptied, all of it to fill a hole in himself that the gold, now that he had it, had not touched. He had crossed the whole world to take, and arrived more empty than the poorest man on that shore. The thought would not leave him. Maybe you have known a hunger like his. Not for gold, perhaps, but for something you were sure would fill you. And then you got it and the hole was still there. The Muisca knew that trap. It is why they gave. An open hand cannot clutch a wound. That was the medicine he had crossed an ocean to refuse. In the days after, the seeker changed. Quietly. He did not announce it. He stopped driving the laborers so hard. He gave a starving Muisca child part of his own ration. Small things, open hand things. His companions thought the fever had softened his brain. Perhaps, in a way, it had cured it. Stay with him a moment. This is the reason the story survived, I think. Not because of the gold, because even a taker, at the bottom of his taking, could be reached by the open hand. The Muisca truth was strong enough to turn one of the very men who came to destroy it. That is worth remembering before the end. The other takers went on bailing and digging for years. The changed seeker did not join them anymore. He stayed near the lake and learned a little of the language and listened to the old stories. And one day the Muisca chief of that time did something no one expected. He invited the foreigner to watch the rite. So the seeker who had come to loot the lake stood on its shore at dawn and watched a golden man rowed out to give everything to the water. He watched the gold fall, he watched the man rise up poor and shining, and he finally understood what he had crossed the world to steal. It could not be stolen, it could only be done. He wept, they say, not for the gold sinking into the water, for all the years he had spent trying to take a thing that only exists when you give it. The Muisca did not gloat. An old woman simply put a hand on his shoulder, the way you would with anyone who had finally come home. That could have been the whole story. One taker turned. But the world does not usually end so gently, and this story is honest. The other takers were still there, still digging, still hungry. And what came next tested everything the Muisca believed. The lake was about to be reached at last, almost. They had dug a great notch in the rim and the water had dropped further than ever before. In the exposed mud along the edge, gold gleamed everywhere. Centuries of gifts laid bare to the sky for the first time. The takers howled with joy. They waded in. They thought they had finally won. The Muisca stood on the rim above and watched their sacred gifts hauled up out of the mud. It should have broken their hearts and it did hurt. But the chief of that time said something to his people that steadied them. They are taking the gold, he said. They cannot take the giving. Watch, the lake is not finished. And the lake was not finished. The mud that gleamed so richly was also soft and deep and treacherous. The deeper the takers waded toward the center, the more it pulled at them. The greatest treasure lay in the middle, in the deepest muck, right where the lake had always taken its golden men, right where a man could sink. The changed seeker saw the danger first. He shouted from the rim for them to come back, to leave the deepest gold, that the mud would keep them. But a man in the grip of that hunger cannot hear a warning. They waded on, toward the shining center, toward the exact place the lake had waited for them all along. And then the sky, which had been gray all day, broke open. The rains came, the sudden drowning mountain rains the Muisca knew and the strangers did not. Water poured down the slopes. It roared into the drained notch. The lake in an hour began to fill itself back up, fast, faster than any man could climb out. The takers in the deep mud felt the water rise around their knees, their waists. They dropped their sacks of gold and tried to run, but the mud held them the way it had always held its gifts. The changed seeker and the Muisca on the rim threw down ropes, reached down hands, pulled who they could to safety. They saved several. The lake kept the rest. When the rain stopped, the lake was whole again, round, still, full, as if nothing had happened. The gold the takers had piled on the shore was gone, washed back down into the deep with the flood. The notch they had dug had refilled, and the water lay there calm and dark, keeping everything exactly as it always had. The surviving takers stood soaked and shaking on the rim, staring at the water that had swallowed their winnings in a single hour. Some cursed, some wept, and a very few, grew quiet and looked at the lake with something that was almost respect. They had reached for everything. The lake had simply closed its hand, gently, and kept what was given. The Muisca had not lifted a single weapon. They had not needed to. The lake had defended itself the only way it ever did, by being deep and patient and impossible to hold. But the takers would come again. They always did. This was a victory. It was not yet the end. Rest here a while, before we go on. The flood had saved the lake, but the Muisca were not foolish enough to think it saved them. They gathered on the rim the next dawn and looked at the water, and then at each other, and knew a harder truth. The takers had tasted the gold now. They would never truly leave. The chief of that time called a council, not to plan a war. They had no war in them, but to decide how a giving people survives beside a taking one. It was the hardest question the Muisca had ever faced, and they sat with it, in the firelit roundhouse, for many nights. The changed seeker sat among them now, at the edge, invited but humble. He knew his own people better than the Muisca did, and when the chief finally asked him plainly, "How do we make them stop?" the seeker gave an answer that surprised everyone, including himself. "You cannot make them stop," he said quietly. "The hunger has no bottom. If you fill it with gold, it grows. If you fight it, it calls more of itself across the sea. There is only one thing it cannot chew through." He paused. "A story it can never finish. Give them a city that is always one ridge farther on." The elders were quiet. It went against everything in them to lie. But the seeker pressed on gently. "It is not a lie to let them chase their own dream. The gold is real. The city is theirs. Let them carry El Dorado away in their own heads and hunt it forever, farther and farther from your lake." And so, slowly, the Muisca decided. They would not defend the lake with spears. They would defend it with the legend itself. Every stranger who came would be sent onward, kindly, toward a golden city just beyond the next range of mountains. The myth would lead the hunger away from the truth. It was the strangest weapon ever forged. It worked. In the years that followed, the legend of El Dorado spread across the whole of the stranger's world. Not the truth, the golden city. Maps were drawn with it. Expeditions launched for it. Thousands of hungry men marched into the green looking for a place that had never existed, led on by the very people who lived beside the real thing. Here's the part the myths never make obvious. The Muisca did not defeat the takers. They redirected them. They turned the world's greed into a compass that pointed away from home. Every expedition that failed to find the golden city was, without knowing it, protecting a small round lake in the high mist. The failures were the victories. But every clever defense has a price, and the Muisca paid theirs. Feeding the legend meant living forever with strangers passing through. It meant guarding a secret across generations, teaching each child not only to give, but to keep silent about why the giving mattered. It was a heavier burden than the gold had ever been. Stay with this. It matters before the end. A people who had once given everything openly now had to hold something back. Not gold, meaning they learned to smile at strangers and point them onward while guarding the truth in their chests. It cost them their old openness. That was the true price of survival, and they paid it for love of the lake. The changed seeker did not live to see how far the legend would spread. He grew old among the Muisca, and they let him stay. He never went home. There was nothing there for him anymore. He had crossed the world to take gold, and stayed to learn how to give it. He was buried, at his own asking, near the water. The Muisca did a gentle thing at his burial. They scattered a little maize on the water in his name, the first giving he had once not understood. The old woman who had taught him was long gone, but her grandchildren remembered. The taker had become, at the very end, a giver. The lake accepted him too. But the world beyond the mountains did not soften. If anything, the legend made it worse. The more men failed to find El Dorado, the more certain the next ones became that it was real, and near and theirs. A failed dream is often more dangerous than a true one. It cannot be disproved, it only grows. And so a new threat took shape, not a single army this time, but something slower and vaster. The legend itself, loose in the world, drawing wave after wave of seekers toward the highlands across the centuries, the Muisca had turned greed into a compass. But the compass kept sending new hunters. The defense would have to hold for a very long time. The Muisca chiefs who followed inherited this long, quiet war. Each one learned the legend as carefully as the right. Each taught their children the double lesson: give freely and guard the reason. Generations of them stood at the rim of the lake and swore, silently, to keep the mother's secret one more lifetime. Most of them did. There were hard years. Years when strangers came in greater numbers and could not be simply pointed onward. Years when the lake was bailed again, and dug at again, and lowered again, and each time refused to give up its heart. The Muisca endured. They bent. They did not break. The open hand, it turned out, was also very hard to close. Through all of it, the right continued. Even in the dangerous years when strangers watched the shore, the Muisca found ways to make a golden man and give the gold to the water. Sometimes in secret, sometimes at night. But they never stopped. To stop the giving would have been to lose the war without a single stranger lifting a hand. Think about that kind of stubbornness. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. A people who kept giving their gold to the water even while other men tore at their world to steal it. They could have hidden the gold, hoarded it, armed themselves with it. They chose, instead, to keep giving it away. That choice is the soul of this whole story. Maybe you have known a stubbornness like that in yourself. To keep being kind in a world that punishes kindness. To keep an open hand when everyone tells you to make a fist. It is not weakness. It is the hardest strength there is. The Muisca knew it, and they held it, generation after generation, at the edge of that quiet water. The legend, meanwhile, grew beyond anything the Muisca could have imagined. It crossed their own oceans and centuries. El Dorado became a word in far-off tongues for any impossible golden dream. Poets used it. Kings funded it. Men died in deserts and jungles chasing it, and almost none of them ever knew it began with a lake and an open hand. Isn't that a strange thing? The whole world came to know the name El Dorado and got it exactly backwards. They thought it meant a place to be found. It really meant a man who gave everything away. The most famous legend of greed was born from the opposite of greed. The world has been misreading it ever since. The Muisca let the world have its misreading. It kept them safe. But among themselves, at the lake, in the small dark anointing rooms, they kept the true story whole. They knew what El Dorado was. He was not a city. He was every chief who had ever risen from that water poor and shining. He was the open hand itself. In time, the great expeditions grew fewer. The world's maps filled in. The blank spaces where a golden city might hide grew smaller and smaller, until there was nowhere left for it to be. The legend cooled from a fever into a story, and the little lake in the mist, at long last, was mostly left alone. By then, so much had changed. The Muisca world was not what it had been. Time and strangers had worn away much of the old life, but the lake remained. The gold remained in its deep, and the memory of the golden man remained, passed quietly down, waiting for someone, someday, to understand it rightly again. And perhaps that someone is you, tonight. Lying here in the dark, hearing this old story told the right way round. The golden man was not a city. He was not even really the gold. He was a person who learned to open his hand. And that, the Muisca would say, is a treasure you can carry to bed with you. We are near the turning now, where the story of the takers ends and the deeper meaning opens. But first, let the lake settle in your mind. Round, dark, full of quiet gold, guarded not by walls but by a way of seeing. That image is the heart of everything. Hold it softly. Somewhere far below the surface. If the oldest stories are true, the mother still keeps her long watch. Bachue, coiled in the deep, among the gold of 100 generations. She has seen takers come and go like weather. She is not troubled by them. She keeps what was given. That is all she has ever done. The takers thought she was a monster guarding a hoard. The Muisca knew she was a mother holding her children's gifts. Same coils, same deep water. Two ways of seeing, again, right to the end, and which one you believe says more about you than about her. The Muisca chose the mother, so I think will you, half asleep as you are. The story of the takers is over now. They came, they dug, they dreamed, they died, or they changed. The lake outlasted all of it. And what remains, when the greed and the marching are done, is the thing the Muisca cared about all along, the meaning underneath. That is where we go next. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere true. So let the marching feet fade. Let the gray armor rust away in the green. Let the maps yellow and the dreamers sleep. Come up to the still water with me, one more time. And let us ask the gentle question this whole story was really about. What does it mean to give rest? And we will wonder it together. Let me take you back once more into the long middle years when the giving and the guarding lived side by side. There was a chief in those years, a woman this time, who carried the right through the most dangerous season the lake had yet known. Her story is worth the telling. She had been a healer before she led. She knew hands better than most, how they close around a fever, how they open to let a spirit go. When the elders chose her, she did not feel worthy. She felt useful, and that, she decided, would have to be enough. In her time, a great expedition was mounting far below, the largest yet, hundreds of men, drawn by an old map that placed the Golden City closer than ever before. Word climbed the mountains. She heard it at the lake, and did not flinch. She had held dying children. She was not easily frightened. She gathered her people and told them plainly what was coming. She did not soften it, but she reminded them of the old defense, the legend that leads away, the open hand that cannot be pried into a fist. We have survived them before, she said. We will survive them by being exactly what they cannot understand. But she also did something the earlier chiefs had not dared. She decided to perform the rite openly, even as the expedition climbed, to send a new golden man onto the water in full daylight. Her council thought it madness. She thought it was the point. If we hide the giving, she said, we have already lost it. The young man chosen that season was a shepherd of the high pastures, quiet and sun-browned, who spoke more to his llamas than to people. He had never wanted attention. When they told him the lake had chosen him, he went very still, the way he did when a storm was coming over the peaks. Then he nodded once. The woman chief taught him herself, as the old chief had once taught the netmender long ago. She showed him the walk to the raft, the lift of the plate, the breath before the release. But she taught him something more too, how to be watched by hungry eyes and give anyway. That was the new lesson the times demanded. They will be on the ridges, she told him, watching, counting the gold with their eyes as it falls. Let them. You are not giving it to them. You are giving it past them to the mother. Keep your eyes on the water, never on the men. That is how you stay free while they stay hungry. The expedition climbed. Week by week it drew nearer, a slow gray tide coming up through the green. Scouts appeared on the far ridges above the lake, watching, waiting for the main force. The Muisca watched them back, calmly, and went on preparing the rite. Two kinds of patience, facing each other across the mist. The gold was gathered, the emeralds counted. The great stone lifted from its niche. And on the third night the shepherd went into the small dark room to fast, as every golden man had before him, watched now not only by his own people, but by strangers' fires flickering on the ridges above. He was not afraid. He was thinking of his llamas. On the third dawn they anointed him. The gold dust settled over the shepherd's weathered skin until he glowed like the sun he had watched rise over the peaks 1,000 mornings. When they held up the obsidian mirror, he looked at the golden stranger in it and, for once, was not shy. This was a good thing to become. They led him out at dawn. The strangers on the ridges saw him step from the temple and go still. Even hungry men can feel awe. A living gold figure walking down to a sacred lake in the mountain light. For a moment, even the takers forgot to count. They simply watched, the way you watch a sunrise. The woman chief stood at the raft. She and the shepherd looked at each other. Healer and shepherd, two quiet people carrying a whole world between them. She did not say be brave. She said, keep your eyes on the water. He nodded and stepped onto the raft, and the rowers pushed him free. The raft slid out onto the still water. The whole shore watched. The strangers on the ridges watched. And the shepherd kept his eyes on the lake, exactly as he had been taught, as if the hungry men above did not exist. He reached the center. The oars lifted. He waited for the sun. And the sun came. He gave the gold the way he did everything. Quietly, thoroughly, without hurry. The small rafts, the trinkets, the great emerald last of all, held up green and blazing. Then let fall. The strangers on the ridges groaned aloud as the treasure vanished into the water. To them it was madness. To the shepherd it was Tuesday, more or less. He kept his eyes on the lake. Then he slipped into the cold water and washed the gold from his own body, handing even his shining skin to the lake. He rose up plain and brown and shivering, a shepherd again, and the strangers on the ridges who had come for a golden man watched El Dorado turn back into an ordinary person in front of their eyes and understood nothing. This is the part the watchers could never hold in their minds. They had just seen with their own eyes where El Dorado was, and it was nowhere they could dig. It was in a shepherd's willingness to become gold and then let it go. You cannot loot that. You cannot map it. They had found the golden man and could not take him, because he had already given himself away. The rite was done, in full daylight, in full view of the enemy. The woman chief's gamble had paid off in a way beyond gold. The strangers had witnessed the giving, and it had unsettled them. Some of them, that morning, felt for the first time the small, cold suspicion that they had crossed the world to steal a thing that could not be stolen. But doubt is not the same as surrender. The main expedition arrived within days, and its leader was not a man to be unsettled by a native ritual. He looked at the lake and saw only a container of gold he had not yet opened. He gave the order the Muisca had heard before and would hear again. Drain it. This time they came prepared. They had engineers. They had hundreds of laborers. They meant to cut the whole rim open and let the lake pour itself out through a channel, and then walk in and lift the gold from the dry bed. It was the most serious attempt the lake had ever faced. The woman chief watched them dig and did not sleep well. Day after day they cut. The channel deepened. The lake began, slowly, to lower further than ever before, further than the old flood year, exposing rings of muddy shoreline that had not seen the sky in 1,000 years. And in the drying mud, gold began to gleam. The strangers cheered. The woman chief pressed her lips together and waited. Stay with this. It matters before the end. The woman chief did not try to stop the digging. She had learned the deepest lesson of her people. You do not fight the flood with your hands. You trust the deep. The lake had kept its heart through every assault for 1,000 years. She chose to believe it would keep it through this one too. But it was hard to watch. As the water fell, the strangers waded into the shallow muck and hauled up the offerings of her ancestors, little gold rafts, figurines, the gifts of 100 generations of open hands. Each piece that came up out of the mud was a small grief. She felt everyone, and still she trusted the deep. The shepherd, back among his llamas on the high pasture, watched the smoke and the digging far below and felt it too. He came down one evening and stood beside the woman chief on the rim. "They are taking so much," he said quietly. She nodded. "The shallow gold," she said, "not the deep. The deep they will never reach. The mother holds it too close." And she was right about the deep. As the channel cut lower and the water fell further, the lake bed at the center did not dry into walkable ground. It turned to a bottomless soup of mud, too soft to stand on, too deep to dredge. The greatest treasure lay out there, in the middle, in the exact place no engineer could reach. The lake had shaped its own defense over 1,000 years. The engineers tried everything: longer channels, platforms of logs, baskets on ropes. Men lowered on lines who sank to their chests in the muck and had to be hauled out empty-handed. The center of the lake simply would not give up its heart. Week by week the strangers grew leaner and angrier, and more certain the great horde was just a little farther out. Maybe you have chased something like that, a thing that seemed just within reach, that you were sure you would grasp with one more effort, one more month, one more push, and it stayed always a little farther out, pulling you deeper into the mud. The Muisca understood that pull. It is why they gave. The open hand does not sink chasing, only the closing fist does. The season turned. The rains would come soon, the same rains that had drowned an earlier greed. The engineers knew it and pushed their men harder, racing the sky. The woman chief watched the clouds gather over the peaks and felt something like calm. The lake had a partner in the weather. It always had. The mother was not alone. But this expedition's leader was cleverer than the ones before. He saw the rains coming too, and he did something no taker had tried before. He set his men to widen the channel enough to keep the lake drained even through the rains, to let the storm water pour straight out the far side so the bed would stay dry and reachable. It nearly worked. Nearly. We are close to the turning of it now. The rains, the channel, the deep mud, the hungry men, all of it coming to a head at once. But the head can wait a moment. Let the clouds hang heavy over the peaks a while. Let the men dig in the gray light. And let yourself grow heavier still, safe in your bed far from all that ancient striving. While the men dug their channel, The woman chief did something quiet and strange. She gathered a small handful of gold, ornaments the strangers had not found, and at night alone she carried it to the edge of the deep central mud and gave it to the lake. Even now, even drained, even watched, she would not let the giving stop. "Hold on," she whispered to the water. "A little longer. Keep your heart. The rains are coming, and I am still giving. You are not alone in this." The dark mud swallowed her small offering without a sound, but something in the deep she felt had hurt her. She went back up to sleep, and for the first time in weeks, she slept well. The next days were a race. The men widened the channel, the clouds thickened, the woman chief kept her quiet nightly giving, the shepherd came down from his pastures to stand with his people, and the whole highland world held its breath, waiting to see whether the sky or the greed would win. The lake in the middle kept its heart and said nothing. The shepherd, standing on the rim, watched the strangers toil in the mud and felt no anger toward them, only a kind of sorrow. "They work so hard," he said to the chief, "for a thing that would not even make them happy." She looked at him. "You have become wise," she said. He shrugged. "The llamas taught me. They want only what they need. It is a peaceful way to live. Maybe there is a llama wisdom in you too, somewhere under the days wanting, the part that knows you already have enough." The Muisca built a whole civilization on that quiet knowing. It did not make them poor. It made them the only people in the story who were never, for one moment, hungry. Rest in that thought. It is a soft place to lie. The channel was nearly finished. One more day, the engineers said, and the lake would stay drained forever, and the deep gold would be theirs. That night, the woman chief went down and gave her small offering as always, and whispered to the water, "Tomorrow then? Whatever you are going to do it tomorrow." And she went up and waited for the dawn. But that is the dawn where everything turns, and we will come to it soon. First, let me hold the story still one more time and tell you how this old tale traveled out of these mountains and into the whole world's imagination, because that is a wonder of its own. Rest, and let me tell it gently. The word El Dorado began, as you know, as a description of a man. El Dorado, the gilded one, the golden one. Just an adjective, really. A shepherd, a net mender, a chief, covered in gold for a morning, nothing more. The humblest possible origin for the grandest possible legend. But words are slippery, and hunger is a poor listener. El Dorado, the gilded man, became El Dorado, the gilded kingdom, the gilded city. A whole empire of gold, roofed and paved and glittering, somewhere in the green heart of a continent. The man was forgotten. The city took his name, and the city had never existed at all. Let me pause here, gently, and tell you how far that phantom traveled. It crossed oceans in the mouths of returning seekers. It was painted onto maps by men who had never seen the mountains. It grew a little more golden with each retelling, the way a snowball grows rolling downhill. Within a lifetime, half the world believed in a city that a highland rumor had invented. Kings poured fortunes into finding it. Whole expeditions vanished into jungles and deserts chasing it and never came back. Rivers were named for it. Wars were nearly fought over it. And every drop of that vast striving flowed from one small, gentle truth in the mountains. A man who gave his gold to a lake. The world built a monument of greed on a foundation of generosity. The Muisca, if they could have seen it, might have found it darkly funny. The whole world convulsing with greed over a story about the opposite of greed. Men dying in swamps for a city, when the real treasure had always been a way of holding your hands. The legend outran its own meaning entirely, and no one noticed for centuries. And yet, here is the gentle turn. The meaning was never truly lost. It survived, folded quietly inside the very legend that seemed to bury it. Every time someone says El Dorado, they are saying, without knowing it, the name of a man who gave everything away. The truth rode secretly inside the myth, all the way to you, tonight. So hold this as the story returns to the mountains. The legend that traveled the world was a disguise. Underneath the golden city, underneath the greed and the maps and the dying, there was always just a lake and a right and an open hand. Keep that truth close. It has come a very long way to reach you. Now back to the drained lake and the dawn where everything turned. The dawn came gray and heavy. The engineers rose before light, eager to finish the channel and claim the deep gold at last. The woman chief rose too, and the shepherd, and all the Muisca, and they gathered on the rim to watch. No one spoke. The clouds sat low and dark on the peaks. The air felt thick, the way it does before a mountain storm. The engineers made their final cut. The channel broke through, and for one triumphant moment the last of the shallow water rushed out through it, leaving the great mud bowl of the lake bed more exposed than it had ever been in 1,000 years. The strangers roared. The deep gold at the center glittered. Closer than ever, they began to build their platforms out toward it. The woman chief watched the gold gleam at the center and felt her old faith waver for the first time. It was so exposed now, so close to their reaching hands. She looked up at the dark clouds and whispered, "Now, please, now." And the shepherd beside her took her hand, and they waited together, and the sky did not move. The strangers pushed their platforms further out over the deadly mud. Their leader himself went out on the furthest one, unwilling to let another man claim the deep gold. He knelt at the platform's edge, reached down with a long hook toward the glittering center, and his fingers, for the first time in 1,000 years, came within an arm's length of the mother's heart. And that was the moment the sky finally broke. Not gently, all at once. The clouds that had hung for days split open, and the mountain rains came down like a sea turned upside down. Water roared off every slope at once into the great wide channel the strangers had so cleverly cut, and the channel, made to drain the lake, now became a river filling it faster than any man could run. This is the darkest moment of the whole long tale, so let me tell it softly. The water came into the lake bed from every side at once. The strangers on their platforms felt it rise around the log legs, felt the whole structure begin to shift in the softening mud. Their leader, still reaching for the gold, looked down and saw the water climbing his arm, and understood too late what he had built. But the Muisca were not cruel, and the story is not cruel either. The woman chief did not stand on the rim and gloat as the flood came. She did the thing her people always did. She acted with an open hand. She sent every strong Muisca down the safe channel edges with ropes and poles to pull the drowning strangers out of the rising water. Even these. Even now. The shepherd waded out furthest of all. He reached the leader's collapsing platform as the water took it, and he gripped the drowning man's wrist, the same hand that had been reaching for the gold, and he pulled. The leader clung to him, and for a moment the two of them, taker and giver, hung together in the flood, joined by one open hand. The shepherd hauled him to the rim. The leader lay in the mud, coughing, alive, saved by the very people whose gold he had come to steal. He looked up at the shepherd, a man he had watched become gold and give it all away, and something broke in him that no flood could have caused. He wept, and he did not reach for the lake again. By the time the rain stopped, the lake was whole again, round, full, still. The great channel had healed over into just another green fold in the rim. The deep gold lay untouched at the center, exactly where it had rested for 1,000 years. And the mother, if she had ever truly stirred, settled back into her long calm. The lake had kept its heart, again. The woman chief stood on the rim and let out a long breath. Her faith had held. The deep had kept its promise. She looked at the shepherd, muddy and exhausted, who had just pulled an enemy from the flood, and she thought, "There is El Dorado, not the gold in the water, the man on the shore with the open hand. That is the treasure. That is what we have been guarding all along." The rescued leader stayed for a time, as a broken man will, and then went down the mountain and did not return. What became of him, the story does not clearly say. Some tellings have him renounce his gold and live simply. Some have him die on the coast, still haunted by the shepherd's open hand. Either way, he never again reached for the lake. It had changed him, the way it changed everyone who truly saw it. The woman chief led for many good years after that. She never faced so great a threat again. Smaller parties came and were pointed onward, kindly, toward a city farther on. The rite continued, chief after chief, golden man after golden man, and the deep gold stayed given, and the open hand stayed open, and the lake kept its heart through all the years that followed. When at last the lake called her home, they gave her ashes to the water as they had given every chief before, and the village hummed that low wordless note, and the shepherd, old himself now, stood at the rim and wept for his friend. Then he went back to his llamas and lived out his days in the high pastures, content, wanting only what he needed. Their story, like all the others, sank quietly into the deep of the legend, one more open hand among 1,000. The world outside remembered only the golden city and went on chasing it. But the mountains remembered the truth and passed it down from chief to chief, waiting for the day someone would tell it rightly again. Perhaps that day is tonight. Let me slow us all the way down now. The great striving is over. The floods have come and gone. The takers have died or changed or wandered off after their phantom city. What is left is the thing that was always at the center, not gold, but a lake, round and dark and patient, keeping what was freely given. Rest with that image. Let it hold you. Think of everything that lies down there in the green dark, the net mender's gold, from the very first telling, the shepherds, the woman chief's small nightly offerings, 1,000 years of open hands, all resting together at the bottom of a quiet lake, undisturbed, unspent, complete, not lost, kept. There is a difference, and it is the whole of this story. And somewhere among all that gold, if the oldest stories are true, the mother keeps her patient watch still. Bashui, who rose from the water at the beginning and returned to it to keep her children's gifts forever. She is not a dragon on a hoard. She is a mother with her arms full of everything her people ever loved enough to give away. That is a gentle thing to fall asleep beside. Not a hoard guarded by fear, but a treasure held by love. Not gold locked away, but gold given home. The Muisca understood something the whole striving world never has, that the safest place for what you love is not your closed fist, but the open water. Rest in that understanding. It is soft, and it is true. We are near the end of the story now, and moving toward its meaning. But before we cross into that quieter country, let the whole tale settle over you one last time. A people in the mist. A lake like a coin. A man made of gold for a single morning, who gave it all away, and by giving, kept it forever. The rite went on for many generations more, quietly in the high mist, while the world below chased its golden city in vain. Each new chief learned the walk to the raft, the lift of the plate, the breath before the release. Each became gold for a morning and gave it home. The lake grew deeper with gifts and richer with meaning, and the open hand was passed always to the next. Nothing lasts forever, of course. In time, the old Muisca world faded, worn down by centuries and strangers and change as all worlds are. The great rites ended. The last golden man rose from the water, poor and shining, and there was not another after him. An age closed, gently, the way a lake closes over a gift. But the lake did not close over the meaning. That is the wonder. The rites ended, the people changed, the centuries rolled on, and still, at the bottom of a quiet round lake in the mountains, the gold rests, given, kept. And still the word El Dorado moves through the world, carrying its secret truth to anyone willing to hear it rightly. Like you, tonight. The gold is still there. That is not a legend, it is simply true. Divers have gone down. Engineers have tried again in later ages with better machines. The lake has been lowered and searched and probed, and still it keeps its heart. The deepest gifts have never been recovered. The mother holds them yet. Some things, it turns out, stay given. Isn't that a good thing to know as you drift off? That somewhere real, in the mountains of this world, there is a quiet lake that has kept faith with 1,000 years of open hands and refuses still to give up what was freely given. The Muisca are mostly gone. Their lesson is not. It rests in the water, patient as the mother waiting. Let us stay in that quiet a while before the story fully closes. There is no rush. There has never been any rush in this tale. The Muisca measured time by the moon and the lake, not by wanting. So let us measure this last stretch that way too, slowly, softly, one calm breath at a time. You are safe. The story is nearly told. Rest. Somewhere below the surface, the net mender rests, who returned a trinket to the reeds before anyone asked, and the old chief who taught him, and the shepherd who pulled an enemy from the flood, and the woman who healed with her hands and trusted the deep. All of them down there together, in the green dark, their open hands finally at rest. They were not extraordinary people, most of them. A net mender, a shepherd, a healer, ordinary hands that learned an extraordinary thing, how to open and let go and stay open. That is the only magic in this whole story, and it is a magic you already carry in your own two hands, whether or not you have ever used it. The Muisca would want you to know that. Maybe half asleep, you can feel your own hands now. Resting, open, empty, not grasping at the day that has passed, not clutching at the day to come. Just open. Just still. That is the shepherd's wisdom and the mother's peace, and the whole secret of El Dorado, all at once resting quietly in your own palms. Let them stay open. Let yourself grow soft. The story does not really end, you know. Not while the gold rests in the lake. Not while the word carries its secret. Not while a single pair of hands anywhere chooses to open instead of close. In that sense, El Dorado is happening right now. Wherever someone gives freely and asks nothing back, the Golden Man is not gone. He is only, always becoming. So we come, gently, to the last of the story proper. Everything after this is quieter, meaning and memory and rest. But the tale itself is told, a lake, a rite, a man made of gold who gave it all away, and a truth that outlived every empire that came to steal it. Hold it softly now, let it settle all the way down. There is a stillness now over the whole valley of the story. The village sleeps, the terraces sleep, the high pastures sleep, and the llamas with them. Even the strangers, wherever they wandered off to, are long since at rest. Only the lake stays awake, the way water does, keeping its quiet watch over everything given. And you are nearly asleep too. That is right. That is good. Let the last images drift by slowly. Gold dust settling on brown skin in a small dark room. A raft sliding onto black water at dawn. A great emerald catching the light and vanishing. A plain man rising up from the deep, poor and shining, more himself than ever. Let them pass like the mist over the lake, unhurried, and let them go. You do not need to hold on to any of it. That is the whole lesson, after all. Let the images go the way the Muisca let the gold go, gently, completely, without grasping. What is worth keeping will keep itself down in the quiet deep of you, the way the lake keeps its gold. You can open your hands now and simply rest. We will let the lake hold the story now, the way it holds everything else. In a moment we will speak, very softly, of what it all means. But even that will be gentle, more like a lullaby than a lesson. There is nothing left to worry, nothing left to reach for, only the still water, and the given gold, and your own slow breath. Rest. Let me pause here gently, one last time, and tell you where you can still find this story in the waking world, because it is not only a legend, it is a real lake, in real mountains that you could stand beside one day, and the people who told it were real, and their open hands changed more of the world than any conqueror's fist. That is worth knowing. The lake is still there, high in the mountains of Colombia, round and quiet as it always was. You can walk to its rim. You can see the great notch that hungry men once cut, healed now, softened by grass. You can look down at the dark water and know that somewhere beneath it, the gold of 1,000 open hands is resting still. It is a real place. The wonder is real. And the gold the Muisca made is real too. Much of what was not lost to the water was gathered up over the centuries, and some of it survives. Tiny golden rafts with tiny golden figures, made only to be given away, now resting behind glass where anyone can see them. The famous one shows a chief on a raft, surrounded by his people, at the exact moment of the rite. The moment you have been picturing all along. Think of that. A little golden raft, made 1,000 years ago to be dropped into a lake and never seen again, and yet here it is, still, carrying the memory of the Golden Man to everyone who looks at it. The Muisca gave it away, and by giving it away, they kept it. Even the artifacts obey the lesson. Even the gold understood. So the story is not only in your mind tonight. It is in a lake you could visit, and a golden raft you could see, and a word the whole world still uses without knowing what it means. The Muisca are gone, but they left their truth scattered everywhere. In gold, in water, in language, an open hand you keep finding, if you know how to look. Now let us return, one last time, to the meaning of it all. We are almost at the end of the telling now. What remains is soft and short and gentle. But before we cross fully into the quiet, let the whole shape of it rest in you once more. The paradox at the heart of everything, that the Golden Man was richest in the moment he gave his gold away, that keeping is a kind of losing, and giving a kind of keeping. The world has spent 500 years hunting El Dorado and getting it exactly backwards, looking for a city to take when the truth was a man who gave, looking for gold to seize when the treasure was a hand that opened. The greatest treasure hunt in history was a long, sad misunderstanding, and the answer was always resting, in plain sight, at the bottom of a quiet lake. You know the answer now. You have known it, really, all along. Some quiet part of you recognized it the moment we began. That the things worth most are the things held loosely. That an open hand is richer than a full one. That is not a lesson the Muisca invented. It is one they remembered and kept, and gave to the water, and to us, and now to you. Carry it lightly, the way they carried the gold. You do not have to do anything with it tonight. You do not have to become the Golden Man by morning. Just let the truth of it rest in you, softly, the way gold rests in the lake. Given, kept, patient, in no hurry at all. It will still be there when you wake. It will always be there. The valley is fully asleep now. The story has laid itself down like mist settling on water. There is nothing left to tell, only a little to feel, and then the quiet. Let your breath slow to the rhythm of the lake, in and out and still, in and out and still. The mother breathes that way. So can you. Somewhere far below, the gold rests. Somewhere below that, the mother keeps her watch. And above it all, the mist lies soft on the water, and the stars turn slowly, and the whole old story holds you the way the lake holds its gifts, gently, completely, asking nothing back. You are held, you can let go, that is the whole of it. In a little while, the telling will end, and there will be only the quiet, and your own slow breathing, and the dark. That is not a loss. That is the last, best gift the story gives, the same gift the Muisca gave the water. It lets go of you, gently, so you can rest. Let it carry you down. You have come a long way tonight, up a mountain, through the mist, into an old and gentle world. You have watched a man become gold and give it all away. You have seen a lake keep faith for 1,000 years, and now you are here, at the soft end of it, nearly asleep, holding nothing, needing nothing. That is exactly where the story wanted to bring you. Let the mountain hold you a moment longer. The air is thin and cool and clean. The lake is still. The gold is safe in the deep. The mother keeps her watch, and the golden man, every golden man, across 1,000 quiet years, rests in the green dark with his open hands finally still. You are among gentle company tonight. Rest easy. We are nearly at the very end, just a little further into the quiet. The story has almost finished handing itself to you, and soon it will let go completely, and there will be only the soft dark and your slow breath. Do not reach after it. Let it go the way they let the gold go. What is yours to keep will keep itself. So here, at the last, is the whole of it, small enough to fall asleep holding. A lake like a coin, a man made of gold, an open hand, and a truth the world keeps missing and you will not, that everything worth keeping, you keep by giving away. Hold that lightly as you cross into sleep. It is the golden man's gift to you. And so the story reaches its true ending, not with a battle, not with a treasure found, but with the quietest triumph of all. The lake, after 1,000 years and 100 hungry men, keeps its heart. The gold stays given, the open hand stays open. Nothing was taken that mattered. Everything given was kept. That is the victory. It was always this quiet. Picture it one last time, the whole of it at once. The mother in the deep, arms full of 1,000 years of gifts, the gold resting quiet above her. The still dark water, the soft mist, the turning stars, and every golden man who ever gave himself to the lake, at peace in the green dark, their open hands finally, completely at rest. The story has given you everything it had to give, and now, like the golden man, it opens its hands and lets go. There is nothing more to hold, nothing more to reach for, only the still water and the given gold, and the mother's patient watch and your own slow breath, carrying you gently down towards sleep. Let it. You are ready. The mist lies on the water. The gold rests in the deep. The mother keeps her watch. The stars turn slow above the sleeping mountains. And the golden man, at last, is simply at peace, as you are, now, nearly asleep, your own hands open, holding nothing, needing nothing, kept safe by the oldest and gentlest truth there is. Rest now. The story is told, the gold is safe, the lake keeps its faith. There is nothing left for you to do but breathe and let go, and drift. The golden man gave everything and lost nothing, so can you. Close your eyes on the still water. We will hold the meaning of it gently in the quiet that comes next. So what does it mean, this old story of the golden man? Let us hold it softly, the way you hold something you already half understand. Begin with the gold. The gold was never the point, it was only the proof. Anyone can give away what they do not want. To give gold, real gold, that is the harder, truer thing. That is why they chose the most precious things. The great emerald, the finest work of the goldsmiths. Only the best could prove the giving was real. Cheap gifts prove nothing. And the lake. Why give it to water and not to people? Because the water asks for nothing back. A gift to the lake could never become a trade. It stayed pure giving. When you give to a person, some part of you may hope for thanks, for love, for return. The Muisca wanted to practice giving with no hope of return at all. The lake made that possible. And the gold dust on the man's own body, that is the deepest symbol of all. For one morning he was not poor, and he was not rich. He was the gift itself, and then he gave even that away. He rose from the water poor, but everyone on that shore knew a secret. He was not less than before. He was more. The emptiness was the treasure. That is the paradox at the center. Maybe you have felt the small shape of this, the strange lightness after you give something away that you were afraid to lose. That lightness is what the whole rite was built to reach. The takers never found it because it cannot be taken. It only appears when you give. Reach for it and it vanishes. Open your hand and it is there. That is its strange law. The mother in the deep is a symbol too. She is where everything given goes to rest, not to be lost, to be kept safe by something larger and gentler than any one of us. Every people has needed a place like that, somewhere to set down what is too precious and too heavy to carry alone. For the Muisca, it was a lake. For you, it may be something else, but the need is the same. The takers had no such place. That was their poverty. They carried everything, clutched everything, and it dragged them into the mud. They had gold and no lake to give it to, so it drowned them. That is the quiet lesson under the whole story. It is not wrong to have gold, it is only dangerous to have nowhere to put it down. Wealth without giving becomes a weight. The lake was the Muisca's way of staying light. And the green emeralds. The color of living things, they remind us that giving is how life stays alive. A held seed rots. A planted one grows. The Muisca planted their gold in the water, and their giving grew a whole gentle world. There is a universal thing here, older than the Muisca, older than gold. Every wise tradition, in its own words, has said the same, that the open hand is fuller than the closed one, that we keep best what we release. The Muisca simply built it into a rite, and a lake, and a man made of gold, so that no one could forget. They turned a truth into a picture, and the picture was so strong it outlived the people who made it. And here's the gentlest part. You do not need a lake or gold dust or a raft at dawn. You already have the only thing the rite required. 2 hands, and the choice to open them. That is all it ever was. So when you hear the name El Dorado now, you will hear it rightly. Not a lost city of gold, a man who gave his gold away, and the quiet wealth that filled the space it left behind. The world spent centuries digging for the wrong thing. You found the right thing lying down in the dark, half asleep simply by listening. That is a fitting way to receive it. The best gifts arrive quietly. Hold it lightly as we move toward the very end. You do not have to carry it anywhere. Like the gold, it will keep itself safe in the deep of you, for whenever you need it. The Muisca faded, but their golden man never did. His name became a word the whole world uses now, in 100 tongues, mostly without knowing where it came from. El Dorado came to mean any golden dream, any far-off place of endless riches, any prize just beyond reach that we spend our lives chasing. The city that is always one ridge farther on. Explorers carried the word across whole continents. Poets wrote of it. Cities and roads and dreams were named for it. It became one of the most powerful ideas the world has ever chased. And all of it grew from one small rite in the mist, from a man covered in gold for a single morning, who rode onto a lake and gave everything away, the whole vast dream, from one open hand. There is a gentle irony in the legacy. The world took a story about giving and turned it into a story about getting. The golden man became a golden city. The lesson became its own opposite. But the true meaning was never fully lost. It waited, folded inside the word, patient as the gold in the lake, waiting for tellings like this one to turn it back the right way round. And the real lake still keeps faith. It is protected now, its waters guarded, no longer drained by hungry men. The deepest gold rests where it always has. The mother still keeps her watch. The golden rafts the Muisca made survive too. Behind glass, small and perfect, people come from all over the world to look at them. They came, in the end, to see a gift. The Muisca would have liked that. That is the truest legacy, not the treasure hunts, not the maps, not the ruined men, but this, that a small mountain people's way of holding their hands still teaches the world, gently, 500 years on. And now it has reached you. here, in the dark, at the end of your long day. The Golden Man's gift, passed hand to hand across 1,000 years, resting finally, softly, in yours. The story is told now, the lake is still. There is nothing left to do but breathe, and drift, and rest. Let the mountains hold you. The air is cool and clean, the stars turn slowly. Everything is at peace. And when you return, there will be another old story waiting, somewhere warmer, somewhere with fire and sand. Something is waiting there in the warm dark. You can almost feel it, but not tonight. Tonight, just rest. We will be here, when you are ready. No hurry, no test, just another quiet place to land. Let your breath slow to the rhythm of the water, in and out and still, in and out and still. The gold rests in the deep. The mother keeps her watch. You are safe and held and free to let go. There is nothing to reach for, nothing to hold. Open your hands like the Golden Man and simply rest. The mist lies on the water. The stars turn above the peaks. The whole old world is quiet now. So are you? Sleep well. The Golden Man gave everything and lost nothing. So can you? Good night.